Well, we are 7 minutes in. We're in 60 people strong. Should we slowly get this rolling, Harman?
Yes, I can get this started. So let's take this forward. Thank you, Janet, for helping with the initial setup. So apologize to those in time zones not conducive to the live event time. This is being recorded, so we'll share. But I promise you will enjoy the recording as well. I'm also looking for folks in Asia, Europe who want to come up with a relevant topic and panel in their own time zones so we can do more of these. So if you're hearing this recording at another time and you're interested, please feel free to connect with me. So let me introduce myself in that case. I'm your host for the panel discussion today. My name is Harman Batra. The topic for the panel is, as you see, the courage to be the first. I am working at Uber right now as a director of product reliability. I have many years of experience as a TPM and TPM leader, both at Amazon and Airbnb. Before I talk about our panelists, I want to introduce some behind-the-scene collaborators. You heard from Zenith. He's my partner in crime for TPM meetups. He's right now head of the infrastructure TPM at Robinhood. And then we have Jen Russell, who you'll probably hear during Q&A session. She's a principal TPM at Twilio. Quick background on this group. It started as an SF-based in-person meetup in 2018. I got introduced to it in 2019. I managed to host an in-person meetup at Airbnb in 2020, just before COVID stalled us. Since then, we've used this workspace to learn from each other and share with others. In 2021, we kicked off a virtual sequence of panel discussions, and many TPMs globally have joined the TPM Slack workspace, which is a good place to interact with others and make meaningful connections. Though I find we have gotten a little complacent on the channel and we don't interact that much. So if you guys are on the channel, please start interacting. I think so. It's good to learn from others, and some of the things that I've seen shared over there have been very helpful to each other. So going forward from there, this time around, we have brought in folks who have shown more courage than most of us here. They either left their cushy jobs to be the first TPM in an upcoming company, or pitched the role to their readers and let from the word go. They are either in IC role right now or leadership role, and we hope you'll learn a lot from their perspectives on mustering the courage to be the first to build a TPM organization. You will learn from them how they got introduced to the role, what they have started from, what was the perception of TPM before and after they came on board, and how they have built the team or function, etc. So you'll have some good questions to discuss. We will ask questions that are prepared in advance, but looking forward to your own questions. So please use Q&A section of Zoom. Or upvote the questions that you are interested in. With that, I would like to invite the panelists on the virtual stage. Please get off videos and join us on the stage. Perfect. So let's start with brief introduction on the panelists. The leading question for them is like, can you share a little about your work history and highlight some of the exciting things that you have worked on? And Lawrence, let's start with you first.
All right. So happy to be here, and nice to meet all of you. My name is Lawrence. I'm currently a TPM at Figma. As far as my career journey, I started out in software engineering at a startup. I was doing full stack. There was like 20 some of us engineers to 1 PM and 1 designer. And so in the process of having to do a lot of things myself, I realized I was interested in a much more holistic view of building product. From there, I transitioned to TPM to work at Uber. And while I was there, I had the privilege to work across a number of different organizations, from Driver, Rider, Uber Eats. And so the most exciting thing that I did there was actually working on the MVP of Uber Grocery, which at the time was the Corner Shop acquisition. So that was one of the most memorable things that I did. Afterwards, I transitioned to work at Instagram, where I was a product TPM for a while. There I worked on Instagram Reels, supporting the machine learning platform teams that were doing ML or detection of trends, as well as audio on the platform, and kind of working with product managers to surface that to our users. And then after that, I've come to Figma, where I've been the TPM, the one and only, for the last 6 months or so.
Thank you, Lawrence. I think that we'll have a lot to chat about Uber Grocery, as that's something my team is also supporting as we move into that journey of being a grocery service too. Moving on to Lindsay.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Lindsay, she, her, and I currently head up strategic operations at Airtable. So I actually started out my career mostly in entertainment tech, which I was in for about 14 years. And in the last 2 moved into the SaaS industry. So I started out as a software engineer at E! Entertainment, which turned into NBC Universal, building their website for their news and their TV shows. Sort of fun fact, I worked on their first live Twitter Q&A with the Kardashians back in the day. And then I moved on into technical program management from there at Hulu and was there for 7 years. Became a people manager there, built out the web TPM team across the US and China. Really there I kind of worked on things like launching their ad-free tier, their live TV, probably many web redesigns in the process of my 7 years there as well. And then as Harman said, I left my cushy job and I was brought on to build the TPM discipline and kind of lead product and engineering operations at Quibi, which was, I was one of the first in the door there, one of the last out the door in the 2 years that we survived, and really also helped kind of interestingly manage the shutdown of that company a couple of years ago. And now I'm the head of strategic operations at Airtable. For those that don't know, Airtable is sort of a connected apps platform and allows people to customize and build connected workflow apps on top of common data. Didn't have to describe what Hulu is, but Airtable for those that don't know. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at today and really excited to be here and talk with you all.
Thank you, Lindsay. So Airtable is very, very popular if you talk to developer community. So I hope more and more people know about it and use it. So over to you, Ian, to talk about your journey. And one thing I'll point out here is you look very different than your LinkedIn profile picture. So I was not able to really say, is it the same person or not?
Oh yeah, it's the mustache, I guess. So yeah, great to see everyone. Excited to be here. So my name's Ian Stainbrook. I work at FullStory, where I lead the TPM team. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Just a little as far as my background. So I was part of the Dropbox crew that was mentioned earlier. So that's where I went to work initially. Met some awesome people, some of whom are probably on this call. And I was able to try a few different roles there, get exposed to different parts of the business. I ultimately ended up on the security engineering team as a TPM. So that was my first exposure to TPM. I got to work with product security and act as kind of the bridge between security and the rest of the product organization, which was a lot of fun. And then after Dropbox, I moved over to FullStory, which is where I still am today. At the time I joined, we were around 80 or 90 people, and we're around 600 today. So definitely some fun high growth experience. I didn't actually start at FullStory as a TPM. I was in this hybrid role where I was a customer facing software engineer. So this was before we had teams for sales engineering and solution architects. I got to serve in that capacity. And then finally, about 2.5 years ago, we decided to start up a TPM team, which I can talk more about how that came about later. So I transitioned over to TPM. I was an IC and a team of one for about a year, and then moved into the manager role and started to gradually grow the team from there.
Thanks, Ian. That's amazing to hear. Last but not the least, Aman.
Hey, everybody. First off, I want to do a quick shout out to my panelists. It tells you how connected the technology world is. So I work at Seismic, which is the leader in sales enablement. We use Airtable quite extensively, as well as Figma with our design team. And FullStory is one of our newest customers. So very excited to be talking with you all.
And you all ride on Uber, right?
Yes, I've do many a ride on Uber too, of course. Robinhood I haven't used yet, but maybe someday. So it'll all come together. So I'm the global head of technical program management and engineering operations at Seismic. I started my career several years ago as a developer, then moved into product management. From product management, I moved into program management and really found my sweet spot, a mix of my business acumen and technical skills really coming together. That's why I do program management effectively. But over at Hyperion, I was responsible for revamping the user interface and bringing to a very server-side culture more of a user empathy. And so we did that working with Frog Design. So that was one of the bigger programs I ran. The other was to bring the BI suite together so it could compete with the Cognos and business objects for the world, and maybe made us very interesting to Oracle, who then acquired us. And I spent the next 12 years over at Oracle working on the Fusion applications. So if any of you are joining from Google Cloud, I spent years working with Thomas Kurian directly as we did the initial inception of the Fusion applications and the first 10 releases of them. Then, as Harman was mentioning, I left that very cushy job. Of course, if you know Thomas, you know, it wasn't that cushy, but moved from that into MapR. Which is the first story I'll tell you a little bit about. Was a big data startup, now part of HPE, and so was the first technical program manager there. Built a small team out there, and we'll talk more a little bit later about that one. From there, I went to Conviva, which is a video analytics platform. I believe NBC uses it, so it could have been another tie-in back to Lindsay. But one of the leaders in desktop set-top analytics. So with HBO, Turner, several of the biggest companies use that analytics platform. From there, moved over to Asana into business technology and built out the first TPM organization within BizTech at Asana. And then finally over to Seismic, where I've built out the Seismic technical program management team, being the first in this new role and building it out to a team of 8.
Perfect. Thank you for the intros. Before we go deeper into learning more about each one of them, TPM experience, especially the first in the role, a part of it, I wanted to share a bit more about the TPM role myself. Like, it's one of the niche roles which is not yet found its definition in Wikipedia. So according to me, this role was pioneered by Amazon as a very effective mechanism for cross-team collaboration. While traditional tech companies had a mindset of project and program management as just an enabler function, the big tech embraced this as a strong ownership model with a bias on capital T. So in the last 12 years, the role has evolved a lot and it's been considered a critical role by many upcoming tech companies. Hence, today's topic will be crucial for each of you to understand what it takes to be successful if such an opportunity presents, especially if it comes across as an option for you. And then as you are connected to so many people who are starting their own startups, are looking for adding new people. If you see roles like these, to share on the TPM Slack workspace, so you can help others connect the dots better for them. From there on, let's go into the next question that all the participants will go one by one. So where in that journey you worked as the first TPM? Tell us in more detail why the company org hired the first TPM, what was the company struggling with, and where did they need your help? What was the setup in terms of size of the company and size of engineering teams? And finally, what was the first thing that you solved as a TPM? That will help our listeners understand more about the nuances involved to shape that up. And this time around, let's start with Ian.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, in terms of being the first TPM, so that my current company, Full Story, is where I experienced being the first. And the TPM role sort of came about organically from me having conversations with our engineering leaders. We started to identify areas within engineering where we could really benefit from TPM, which I can touch on more in a little while. In terms of size, when we were starting to have these discussions, the company itself was probably around 200 or 300 people and maybe 75 or so on engineering. So still quite small, but there was a lot of excitement about what TPM could bring to the table, even at that small size. And then my first thing, or like starter project, that I worked on as a TPM was an infrastructure migration. So to set the stage a little bit, at the time, FullStory already had a microservice architecture, but when it came to how we deployed code and actually shipped our code to customers, we didn't really act like we had a microservice architecture. We had one single weekly deploy where we deploy all the different services at the same time. And this worked really well when we were small, but it became more of a bottleneck as we got larger, and it really started to slow down the velocity of the engineering teams. So as you can imagine, you might merge some code and it could be up to 7 days before that actually gets deployed. So the feedback cycle and the iteration cycle gets a lot longer, which is not ideal. So we decided to move all of our backend services to be independently deployable. So each team could control their own destiny in that way. So I got to coordinate that as a TPM, which is great because not only did I gain a ton of knowledge about our infrastructure, but it also exposed me to pretty much every engineering team, which was really valuable as I was getting started in the role.
Great, Ian. Why don't we go towards you, Aman?
Okay, first experience I'll talk about as being the first program manager would be over at MapR. So first off, just a word of caution or just something to consider as you're looking at the roles. So when you go to decide to be the initial TPM, it's very important that you look and decide, is this the right culture? Is this the right fit for you? Based on the interactions you have with the interview panel and anybody else you can talk to. And then think a little bit about, are you ready to wear several different hats, do whatever the team needs to be successful, because in that initial role, you'll play all kinds of different roles. So I started as initially building out program management. Then it was, how do you get agile best practices into a deep system technology type of company? And so how do you slowly bring some of the waterfall type of concepts, which are done because it's very deep system software and needs think time, and bring some agile kind of concepts into various phases of it. And so that was the biggest wins I had initially, was bringing that to the team. But then at the same time, I had to wear several different hats. I ended up doing the budgeting also for the team and a couple other like odd functions. And so a little bit of that will happen as you go. But two of the biggest wins I had was one, building out that kind of agile type of mindset. So it was things like, can you break up designs and design just the core components and design some a little bit later so that you can reduce the overall design time. And then other kind of agile basics, like things like, how can you do iterations, do sprint demos, actually even do the ceremonies. And so one of the bigger wins we had was doing those initial demos and getting the feedback from product very early in the cycle, and rejiggering the overall plan to be successful, just based on seeing the actual code functioning.
Perfect, Aman. Let's go to Lindsay next to tell her story.
Yeah, wonderful. Both what Ian and Aman mentioned totally resonates. So great tips, Aman. I totally agree. Wearing different hats is just absolutely what happens when you are the first TPM. So I'll talk about my experience at Quibi actually, and start with sort of what the size of the company was to give an idea of why we ended up with TPM. So Quibi was only about 10 people actually when I sort of interviewed there, and about 40 when I started, and the engineering team was the CTO and 4 engineers. I have to acknowledge that this is an extremely unique case, Quibi, who had raised almost $2 billion as a startup when I started. And so there were kind of 2 factors at play here in terms of why hiring a TPM when the company was this size. And it was one that the CTO himself had experience with the very large team of TPMs at Hulu. I had worked with him there. And so he understood the value of TPMs and what that brought to a company. And then I think in addition, as I mentioned, the funding and goals and growth that we expected within the first couple of years, those are why, at such a small company size, they decided to sort of bring in TPM. So I think it was that rapid, scale that was being anticipated. I also happened to actually be here at Airtable when the first TPM was hired very recently, and that wasn't until we were about 800 employees with an engineering team of over 200. So that's probably closer to normal, maybe it's somewhere in a sweet spot of like the Q300 that was mentioned before as well. But just to give a sense of like Quibi being quite a unique case to sort of be hiring someone like myself at the beginning. And the first things that I was really solving for, very similar to what Aman said, a lot of the, kind of operational processes and standardization of, agile management, but also really the first thing I was solving for was like, what are we going to build with our alpha product, and who is going to work on what? And so starting to just build up that backlog, prioritization tools, how we're going to track and report on everything, outwards to the rest of the company was really the first things to solve for as a TPM.
Perfect. Great, Lindsay, for those insights. Moving to Lawrence.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear the circumstances that surround all these different companies wanting to bring on their first TPMs. I think Figma is sort of in a similar boat in that it was in the maybe 200s of engineering and the company size in the 500s or maybe low 600s when they decided to bring on TPM. And the way that this discussion came about is basically that the company had just grown very organically, obviously caught a lot of traction, and the teams just sort of kept growing upwards and doing what they were doing and not really looking across and figuring out how to better interoperate. And so it came to a point where leadership realized that probably a new function was necessary whose sole job it would be to connect the dots. And that's the point at which they started looking, and that's the point at which I was eventually brought on. So my focus is definitely on scaling the company in the way that the different product and engineering teams work together. My role, I think, is slightly unusual because even though it is TPM with a T, I do report into the product organization. And so the product team is my direct peers. At the same time, I still work extremely closely with our engineering organization. And I think this is just an artifact of the way that Figma has traditionally operated. That's kind of like why the staffing is the way that it is. But I definitely asked a lot of questions about this setup when I first was interviewing because it is kind of unusual, having always reported through engineering in my prior roles. I think the first thing that I worked on that I would say is like of like kind of worthy scale was the planning process. And so planning is something that has been done differently, literally every single half at Figma in history. And so I came on and my goal was to change it again, but then from there not have to change it so much. And so we sort of reinvented the way that we did planning, and we tried to make it very unique to the way that we operate. And so all of our planning is actually done in FigJam, which is our product for kind of whiteboarding and facilitator product management coordination. And so that was actually a huge success, just throwing everybody into one huge file, seeing everybody collaborate on their plans together in real time. And afterwards, I've been working on a number of other kind of process project management related things that can help speed up execution across the org at large.
Great, thank you, Lawrence. And you are not really in a unique position. I have worked in a role in Amazon where we reported into product organization for most of my 4 years at Amazon Music. So until the transition into the engineering-centric role after a point in time, but a lot of companies experiment on that and see what works based on how they're operating. And you would find those differences around, even starting as an early TPM, that it could be either in engineering or product closely mapped to, depending on where they're trying to solve the problem from. But wow, these are some great insights. I think that now I would love to move towards some individual questions that are specific to each of your experience within these companies. And for our audience, we learn both the IC aspects and the leadership aspects of being first. So let's start with Ian. Ian, about 2 years ago, you blogged about building a team of TPMs in Full Story. Can you share more details about how you got involved in pitching the TPM role as a new role back in 2020? What were your immediate focus when you moved into that role, and finally where the team is today?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, like I mentioned briefly earlier, the TPM role really came about through discussions with our engineering leaders at the time. So this was these initial conversations. This was around mid-2019, and to one of Lindsay's points, we had engineering leaders who had prior experience with TPM and had seen the positive effect. So I think that definitely helped the conversation along. But we started to realize that there were areas that in order for us to achieve the scale and the growth that we wanted to on engineering, we really needed to get these things right. However, they were not things that neatly fit into a particular engineering team. So they were technical in nature. They were cross-cutting, they affected the whole org. Often they involved collaborating outside of engineering as well. And we realized that they really needed to have holistic ownership in order to be successful. So we identified multiple areas like this, and that's why we decided to give TPM a try. So essentially start with one and see how it goes. In terms of what those areas were and what my immediate focus was, we had a few of these programs that we knew we wanted to start building up from scratch. So we had engineering velocity, we had availability/reliability, and we had cloud cost management. So bootstrapping those programs and just trying to get that initial structure in place and have some impact and some quick wins, that's where I spent most of my time initially. And then the remaining time I had was really spent on defining the role itself. So thinking through and getting very clear about what exactly does TPM mean here at FullStory, since it's one of those roles that can have a slightly different meaning at different places. How do we interact with the rest of the org, and all of those questions about the role itself. And then in terms of where we're at today, so there's now 4 of us total on TPM. So we have 3 other awesome TPMs, and everyone has their own program focus and subject matter expertise, which I know I'm certainly really thankful for, because I was bootstrapping these programs initially, but I didn't have deep professional experience in each of these areas. So being able to bring in these experts has really up-leveled what the TPM team is able to accomplish. And yeah, today we're focused on cloud cost, availability, engineering operations, and also supporting the most complex initiatives and projects within engineering that involve a lot of cross-team coordination. So yeah, that's the TPM team today.
Thank you. That's great to learn the growth, very specific to the point where we are trying to, where the company is trying to move towards. I think that's how it needs to be more organic to be able to sustain it effectively and build the right pieces in place, so that as you go for further scale, you know how you can scale it further. Great, Ian. Thanks for your insights. Lindsay, you have built a TPM team in QB from ground up, which likely was a very fast-paced development. As a first TPM and a leader, where do you put more of your attention? Building the team or solving tough problems on the ground?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, we did have a very fast pace of development. We grew the company from about 10 to 250 in about a year and a half. The engineering and product team grew to about 60 of that, and the TPM team was about 4 at the time. So yeah, I think, really this was quite an easy answer for me, which is just solving tough problems first on the ground. I think I didn't hire my first team member until about 6 months in, and then about a year in, a release TPM, like release manager, and a data TPM after that. So really focused on solving the tough problems. Like Lawrence had mentioned, the planning process is really, really important. There's so much time that we waste every time we pivot and change our processes. So it's important to really just lay the foundation for that and get in a steady state and be just an operational machine from day one. And then, very similar to what Ian just described as well, there's so many connection points needed outside of engineering. And a lot of people have a very tough time bridging that gap and talking to engineers and sort of infiltrating that. There's a little bit of the friction and those barriers there. And so actually spending the time sort of creating those relationships, establishing trust before throwing more voices in the room in terms of building up my own team. I'm sure there's other women on the call here today that can sort of relate to sort of being one of the only females in tech potentially within their company. And so there's a lot of proving that you have to do, both being a TPM, proving yourself to the engineers, and just being, a woman in tech as well. And so I think I really, really focused on, really kind of, establishing trust and proving sort of the value early on before really building out a team.
Thanks, Lindsay. That's amazing to hear, the progress you could make and the growth you could get from it. Great. Going over to you, Lawrence. You joined Figma as the first TPM earlier this year. While it's not long ago, I believe by now you have spent some time to know how the company operates and how the teams operate. What were the challenges you observed in this time frame, being the first and possibly the only TPM? Were there any ambiguities in the perception of the role by your partners in the engineering and/or product teams?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting catching up to speed on what's happened at Figma. You may not know this, but the company has been around for over 10 years, and for the vast majority of that, completely underground. But that means that in this entire time, they've been kind of testing processes, adding processes, building teams in a very unstructured way. And so the analogy that I would use is kind of stepping into an overgrown garden, and you can kind of see where things started, but things are kind of all bleeding all over the place. There's some empty plots, there are some places where plants are fighting for space. And so I kind of made it my priority to figure out and talk to a lot of people about what are the challenges that they're facing, what do they feel like is hindering their continued growth. Obviously, scaling the company is the priority. And so what's stopping them from being able to operate at that higher level? And so identifying what are the processes that are in place and who are kind of the key players and the key owners of different areas was the very first thing that I did. And I think, without going into an overly large amount of detail, that's basically the problems that we're facing and everything that kind of comes with scaling. Another fun fact is that we've never had a reorg. I don't know if it's normal for companies to have a lot of reorgs, but you can definitely kind of see in the org structure just the way that things have kind of expanded on their own. And so bringing order to that is definitely the P0 for me. As far as ambiguities in the role, I think I've been very upfront coming on to tell people that this is my job and this is what I'm here to help with. And people are very, very excited about that. Most people that I've been talking to haven't worked with TPMs before, or if they have, it's only been in a very specific capacity or the way that another company does it. And so I'm happy to kind of reset those relationships and just say, well, this is what I do here at this company. And this is how I plan to help add value. This is how we're going to work together. And so I've kind of worked to reset that expectation with everybody, whether or not they had a prior expectation, because I want the work that I bring to the table at Figma to be uniquely suited to the challenges that we're facing. So that's how I would say I've been approaching it. And I think it's worked out really well so far.
Thank you, Lawrence. Good to learn those aspects. Over to you, Aman. Coming into Asana, you consolidated TPMs in your organization. TPMs were previously isolated on separate teams, probably with disparate approaches and processes. What benefits you saw in having a centralized TPM team over decentralized? Were there established perspective on TPM function that you had to redefine as part of the process?
Sure, Harman, I think there's a little mix up in the doc, and I'll actually talk about the Seismic experience versus Asana, which kind of more matches the profile you had mentioned.
Sure, thank you.
When no problem at all. When I came into Seismic, it was kind of interesting. It's very similar to Lawrence's experience. It was many years already functioning, already highly successful in terms of building a customer base, delivering products. And so it was interesting. The org size was about 580. Or so in product and engineering, and 460 on the engineering side. And so what had happened was that it was a consolidation of several different engineering teams that were under different founders. And then it was also through acquisitions as well. So we'd acquired a company called Percolate, one called Grapevine 6, one called Savo, another one called Lessonly. And so bringing all of these different cultures and processes into place was one of the key things we had to do. So the first thing I did when I initially came in was this notion of, can I have a little bit of time to just listen and learn? So I created a 30, 60, 90-day plan. In that first 30 days, I really just did as much as I can and just wanted to learn. What are the biggest challenges of the group? What can I see in terms of the functioning that I might be able to help with? What do the executives think? What do the engineers think? Try to bring all that together. From there, I put together a plan based on that and reviewed it with the executive team as well as with a set of individual contributors around the organization and said, does this really meet the requirements we needed? And so one of the first things we had to go after was the idea of how do we run large cross-team programs effectively. And so that was one of the first things I went over to say, how are we going to plan them? So we did delivery planning, actually using Airtable to once again reach out to Lindsay. But a structured planning process was critical to begin. Then it was about what are the key priorities and how do we get a global priority across all these different teams functioning? And then think about what are the next things we want to build in and based on the pain points, right? And so you always have to build TPM in such a way that it serves the org. It's there, in my opinion, to be a force multiplier. So you think you have one TPM, hopefully it's more valuable than just hiring in one engineer or one product manager. The only way you can do that is by focusing on the biggest problems, as I think Lindsay was mentioning, and solving them in the most scalable way possible. And so the program structure was one of the first. Then the next is that we were coming into planning. What you saw were teams weren't ready to plan for a larger cycle. And so requirements weren't set, designs weren't set. So we came up with this idea of what does definition of ready mean for planning and standardize that across. And so what that did was allow the teams to come to the same place when we were planning so we could have good estimates. It also started to change culture. It was kind of interesting. I was thinking, at first I was thinking like, well, the team adopted this. And after a couple of months of running this, I heard different people using it. Our chief product officer would be like, is that DOR? Or I could hear product manager saying, we need to get to DOR. And so we're going to do this and that. And so it basically changed culture. And so that's one of the biggest wins. And one of the questions on the Q&A, someone asked about that idea of establishing the role. And it was the same. I think Lawrence probably had the same experience. When I came in, there was product and there was engineering and somebody was doing program management, some mix inside there. And so one of the first things I had to do was kind of say, okay, this is the TPM role, I think, based on those initial conversations. And what it did was sorry about that. What it did was it broke the roles in such a way that product could focus on strategy and requirements. Engineering could focus on the technical and the execution on the technical side, and the TPM side could manage the programs and schedule effectively. And so that ended up being a winning combination. And one thing I wanted to leave you with, when I started, everybody was asking, what is a TPM? I don't know what this is. People were Googling it. People would get the acronym in the wrong orders. They'd call it the TMP or something like that. But as we started to build out, people would say, where's my TPM? Can you hire one for my group and things like that? And so that's when you know you've got the winning combination, when people are asking for your products. Hopefully I answered the question effectively, Harman.
Yes, no, definitely. I've had that experience of where is my TPM. The transformation really makes you feel proud about how the things are getting set up. So amazing to hear that, and hopefully that helps others think through their journeys when they choose that path, is how to define their success or their metric for success. Cool. Let's shift our focus to one more round of questions before we wrap up to each one of you. So Lawrence, this time we'll start with you. This probably will be very familiar to you, given that you recently made the switch. During an interview process, what are the kind of questions you need to ask so that you can build your confidence in the company and the engineering leadership, especially going in first? It's critical to have that energy and alignment in your mind that you're making the right call.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important that you know what you're getting yourself into. So I think there's basically two classes of questions that you should be asking. And one is about sort of the company as a whole. And this is something that, you know, you should always be asking before you get into a new job, sort of like how the company is doing on a more macro scale. And then the other is, of course, figuring out what your role is in that. And so what I've been asking is sort of about how people want to be perceived, because I think that tells you a lot about them. And so asking the leadership that, and of course, try to get time with as many of the different folks on leadership as you can so that you have a kind of diverse perspective of the people you'll be working with. But ask them, you know, how do you want your team to see you? Like, what's the kind of leader that you want to be, or even the person that you want to be, so that you have an idea of kind of what makes them tick a little bit. And then also try to understand what's frustrating them, what's preventing them from doing their job from the fullest. And is there something in there where you can add value and, you know, potentially create a really great relationship there? Another set of questions that I'd ask is sort of about the TPM role. So who is currently doing this type of job? Is it more on product? Is it more on engineering that's currently doing this type of project or program management? Why is now the right time that you see TPM to be brought in? Where do you see tactically TPMs adding value in the next 30, 60, 90 days, you know, over the course of longer timeframes? And then also just getting to know the team, the priorities. I asked, like, if your entire team was a person, what would their strengths and weaknesses be? If you had a stop, start, continue exercise, what would that be? And then also in terms of prioritization, if I'm coming on and taking a burden off of, say, a couple PMs, what are they going to be doing with that time instead, to see what other value you're unlocking in the organization? So that's all some different questions that I would ask.
No, those are some great questions that help you find a lot more about the people that you're going to work with. It's important to understand them very closely before you take that plunge, especially if you're going into an unknown company, an unknown team that you have not worked with in the past. These definitely help a lot. Aman, back to you. When is the right time to grow the TPM org? What was your first hire and why?
Okay. So the way I typically look at that is totally based on what the team needs are and what your capacity is. So I have two examples of when I hired the first TPM. So going over back in my MapR days, what we were doing was building out, okay, what are the key things we needed to do? And one of the things we talked about after that initial idea of getting more of an agile mindset was, how do we standardize in the right kind of way? Because we would go into a program meeting and all the teams were slightly different. I used to joke that it was a little bit like going into the UN. Everybody had a slightly different language. We're talking about different things. A story was a different thing for a different team. A bug had a different severity for different teams. And so what we did was say, okay, what's the good ways we can look to standardize this in an effective way? And so we were saying, okay, now we're doing system standardization. Now we're doing Jira workflow standardization. Now we have more work than I could get done and keep everything else running that I was doing. And so it was a good time to bring somebody, another TPM in who had the background in Jira workflows to be able to run a good best practice type approach. And so there, what he was able to do as he first came in was think about, okay, this is industry best practices for Jira workflows, and then here's what every team is doing, and then what's the best practice within MapR, and then we combined those two and got each of the teams built into it. But it's really a scaling type of function. Same type of scenario happened at Seismic, where initially I laid out the program structure. Then we said, if we want program managers to do this role on these different teams, we need more of them. And then we prioritize that based on the need of the teams. And so you can get that notion of when do you bring on the first, when do you bring on the second based on that priority. And if you can leave a little space in between, it's quite effective because you're constantly course correcting as you go. And so you'll adjust that, and your hiring may change as well. And that you term, like I think Ian was mentioning, you may start to hire for domain skill sets, or you might start to hire based on different areas you want to strengthen within the team.
Thank you, Aman. That makes a lot of sense. Lindsay, the next question is for you now. As the first TPM in your org, how did you measure success?
Yeah, this is always a very, very difficult one, measuring success as a TPM, measuring success in what I have sort of shifted to in more just a strategic operational role. As Aman said earlier, I think you really have to show the value, not just sort of write down what the charter is, and potentially negotiate it as you go, right? Based on what you're seeing happening, like what are the strengths and skill sets of your product managers or engineers, and sort of, kind of shaping the TPM role based on that. But there's definitely a couple of things that early on I've used to measure success. The first is predictability. How we measure our capacity and velocity for our engineering and product teams, whether that's via burn down charts and story points and things like that. But understanding, like, are we actually predictable? If the business asks for something, can we determine the timelines, the resource requirements, and how close to actual are we when we do that? So that's the key thing there. And then the other is measuring based on like clarity and prioritization. How often are we pivoting and wasting effort? How are we able to pivot and make decisions in a timely manner? Basically giving enough time to stakeholders to make decisions and trade-offs in the room. And so, I think some of that clarity and priority is sort of measured by maybe our stakeholder cross-functional satisfaction. Do they have the information that they need to do their job? And then just in general, I would say, TPMs, someone once told me that we were the outcome accelerators. And I'm like, I don't know how to measure success of that, but people could see it. People could see that we are able to actually achieve things as a business, faster, on time, and like I said, with predictability.
Great, Lindsay. I like that. And I thought one of the things that Aman said, when people start asking you for TPMs, where is my TPM? I thought that's another way to subjectively start to figure out, yes, we are moving the right path.
Exactly. That's how Hulu ended up with 90 TPMs when we were only, we were under 1,000 engineers and we had 90 of us because everyone was asking for a TPM.
Great. Cool. Let's move to our final question for today, and that's for Ian. What processes and frameworks did you put in place to help the team to be more efficient and effective as you onboarded as the first TPM?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a few of these that I can think of. So first and foremost, I think educating the rest of the org on what TPM means is really important. So as others have said, some people in your organization will have worked with TPMs before and some haven't. And then even if they have, like for the full story case in particular, the way that we define the role is a little bit unique. And so taking an opportunity to actually explain what TPM means to the people you're going to be working with was something really important to put in place. So for us, the first week of every new quarter, we do what's called listening and alignment week. And that's intended to zoom out from all of the day-to-day work that's going on. And we have talks and presentations that are more strategic. And I was able to do a talk during that week to sort of tell the story of TPM to the company. So that was really powerful. In terms of programs themselves, coming up with the actual business outcomes that we're striving for with each program and agreeing and getting alignment with the engineering leaders, that was really powerful. Also, like Lindsay was just talking about, making sure that we can actually measure success. So what are the handful of most important measurements for each program, and actually putting those all in the same place so that the team and really anyone in the company who's interested can actually see those on a week over week basis and identify trends, and always be pushing ourselves to measure wherever we're able to. And then finally, I would say one of the most important things that I worked on was developing the first version of career levels for TPM. So when there are only 1 or 2 people, this may not be that big of a deal, but as you look to grow the team and add more people, having something that you can point to that really shows what career development actually looks like as a TPM at the company is really helpful for people's professional development and to ensure that people feel that they have a path forward to grow themselves as a TPM.
Amazing. These were some great, valuable inputs and insights for our audience and more people as they watch the videos down the line. So thank you, everyone. You shared some great information. Now we should move to audience Q&A section. Let me invite Jen Russell to the virtual stage to help me with audience questions. Jen, are there things that need to be answered live? We should bring this up now.
Sounds good. Thank you to the panelists for answering the questions as we go. It looks like somebody had a question about some of the duties within the TPM role are very similar to a product owner. I think several of you have had many roles within companies. Maybe I'll kick this over to Lindsay if you could comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, as I've mentioned before, I think, each TPM role kind of is unique based on the strengths of the other folks that are sort of in that circle, the product managers, product owners, the engineers and such. And so I think, establishing, like even in the same company, I had to establish roles and responsibilities for maybe different projects based on who I was working with, who the product owner was, and what their sort of strengths were. So I wouldn't say that there's ever this necessarily, very like solid line that you can't cross. But I would definitely say that on the product owner side, they're responsible for the prioritization and the backlog management, also coming up with, working with designers to come up with what we're going to build and maybe the why. And really the TPMs are the how and the when. That's sort of how I would kind of differentiate product owner, is the what and why, versus the how and when with the TPM. That's kind of one of the first maybe lines that I would start out with.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. All right, the next question, I think we have one more time for one more question, right, Harmon? I'll make it an easy one. Maybe somebody could share their must-read book for TPMs. I know Ian's got some blog posts. Ian, do you have any books that you'd recommend?
Oh, wow. So I might, if it's okay, I might pivot the question to podcast because I do not read as much as I should read, but a couple that I would recommend. So I would say Radical Candor, which I think is also a book, but I mostly consume it in the podcast form. That I find really helpful for like how to work effectively with other groups, how to give and receive feedback, and do so in a way that's compassionate but also honest. And the other one I would say, I really like the First Round podcast. I think it's called In Depth, because I would say, you know, a lot of like startup focused podcasts, they're very heavy on the business side, and there's definitely some of that in the First Round podcast, but they actually do a fair amount with engineering and product leaders as well. So as a TPM, I really enjoy hearing how other organizations have structured things and how they've scaled up their product and engineering teams. So that's one place I go to get that information.
Oh, Jen, you are on mute.
Thank you. Great resources, Ian. Thank you so much. As we close out, Harmon, I think we just had a question about accessing the recording. I know it's going to be posted on the Meetup YouTube channel. Maybe you can close this out with some closing remarks about how to get involved with the community. Right.
So I think first I would like to thank our panelists for sparing some time for us and sharing their valuable insights. These are some useful things that really come handy as folks look for their own careers, and learning and experiencing from others at this scale really helps. So what we do with this conversation is, we've recorded the Zoom session. I would transform that into a YouTube video and post it on our YouTube TPM Meetup YouTube channel. You can find it on the Slack workspace. Once we are ready to upload, I will share that. And if you are subscribed to a YouTube channel, you'll get notified. So you will be able to access it, and the message will be shared once it's ready. And how all of you can get involved. We've had over 65 people that joined today. We need more time. This is a group of volunteers, me and Zainat and Jen, and there are a few others that have supported us in the past, and with setting up this event. So if you have topics, if you want to host it, if you want to bring some people as panelists, get in touch with us. We can plan the next event. We have been doing once a quarter when we get a chance, but we'll be happy to do more if we have content and topics available. And the best way once we do this session is to share via recordings that it lives on for people to listen to whenever they are ready to spend time on it. So that's how you can do, but we can interact more on the Slack workspace. Use that as a way to interact with people. All our panelists are there. You can ask them follow-up questions there if you want to, or just throw in questions on various channels we have there. And there are people more than willing to help and answer and share their learnings with each other over time. Cool. That's all from us for this time around. So thank you everyone for being part of this session today. Looking forward to sharing the video and interacting in future with new sessions. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.